To give our 3D object here a flat 2D illustrative type of feel, we're going to apply some very simple flat colors that are devoid of any kind of diffuse 3D shading. So to apply materials in Cinema 4D Lite, all we're going to do is go down here, and this is our material manager. We're just going to double click anywhere down here, and that'll create a default material. If I double click that, it's going to bring up the material editor, and you can see in our material preview window here that basically what this material is by default is just a color channel and a reflectance channel with our default specular. And you can see that this is default diffuse shading. It's got 3D depth, and this is what we do not want. We want flat 2D colors. So how do we do that? Well, first we're going to just remove the color and the reflectance channel. And what we're going to use instead is the Luminance channel. And you can see that our 3D sphere just turned into a flat white circle. So the Luminance channel is typically used to act as a light source if you apply this to an object, and you can use that with other advanced features in Cinema 4D, but in our case, we're just going to use it to apply flat colors just like this to all of our objects in our scene, that there's no diffuse shading, and it removes the illusion of 3D depth. So what I want to do is if I click this color chip right here, I can actually change the color, and what I'm going to do is change this white color to like a grayish blue, like light gray blue, something like that, and I'll just rename this to white. And to apply this to any object here, we can either drag and drop it directly onto the object we want to apply that material to, or we can apply it to the object directly in the object manager. So I'm going to start by putting materials on this Game Boy body. You can see when I applied the material, a material tag showed up. And the nice thing about material tags, especially when using extrude objects, is this selection field right here. Now with this selection field and extrude objects, we can actually isolate where our material is applied by putting commands in this selection field. So if I wanted to constrain or restrict this material tag or this texture tag to, say, the front cap, and remember the caps are the front and back faces of our extrude object, I can do that by putting in the command C1 in the selection field, and you can see that we're now restricting our white material to the front cap of our extrude. And we can actually do the same thing and restrict it to the back cap by just putting in C2. So I'll just rotate around here, and you can see that we now have the white material on the back. So we can constrain textures to front cap and back caps by using selection C1 or C2. We can also do something similar by using R1 and R2. And what R1 and R2 do is restrict materials to the rounding or the fillet caps. And right now we don't have any, but I'll go ahead and reactivate that. And remember, fillet caps are basically the bevels on our extrude objects. So I can go back into my texture tag, and if I want to constrain this to the front rounding, I'll just hit R1, and you can see now we have the white material on our front rounding, and R2 for the rear rounding. And just so you can see how exactly this works, I'm going to just demonstrate the guts of the selection tags by making this extrude object editable by hitting C. And what that's going to do is break everything down into the rounding and the caps. And you can see these little triangles, these are polygon selection tags. And you can see that the names are R1, C1, R2, and C2. So you can see as I move this is just the front cap, and it already has the name that you need to use for that selection field. So if you ever forget, just make your extrude object editable, and you'll unlock all of those commands again. So I'm just going to undo all that to get back to my extrude object. There we go. And I'm also going to turn off our caps, or our fillet caps, and there we go. So I'll just put C1 to restrict to the front cap here. Before I go any further though, I want to go ahead and go into interactive render region. What interactive render region does is actually show you a rendered preview. And right now it's at 50%, and we can crank it up to 100% by moving this little triangle and moving it to the top of our bounding box. And you can see that now we have nice, clear render preview, and I'll just drag my bounding box so it encompasses all of our Game Boy object. And basically what this is like the resolution quality view in After Effects. So right here is 50%, and this is like a third resolution, and then this is a quarter resolution. So same kind of thing, but if we have it at 100%, we have a preview of what this is exactly going to look like when we render this out. So I like to work in this mode just so I can get a constant feedback of how this is going to look. So let's go ahead and keep texturing our Game Boy object here. And the first thing I'm going to do is apply a darker color to the side of our Game Boy body, because if I just have this white material on everything, it's way too flat. We have no sense of the depth. So what I'm going to do is just create a darker shade to apply to the rest of this object. So I'm just going to command, click, and drag to duplicate that white material, and click on the color chip. And what I'm going to do is make like a darker kind of blue, something like that. And this will be gray. And I'll apply that to the Game Boy body. And what you're going to notice is that that totally overwrote our first material, the white material. And why this is because materials are layered from left to right, meaning that the leftmost material, our white material, is applied first. And then any materials applied to the right, any texture tags to the right, will be applied on top of it. So just like layers in Photoshop. So for this to work, we actually need to make sure our layer order is correct. So we need this texture tag to the left of our gray material to actually be to the right. So we're going to apply the cap material and then apply that on top of this base darker gray material. So now we actually have a nice sense of depth. We got some 2D depth because we're using these two shades. So let's go ahead and just start applying different colors to the rest of our objects. So what I'm going to do first is make an even darker blue color, and this can be black. And we'll apply this to our start and select buttons here. We can also apply this to all of our speaker objects here, and to actually apply a material to multiple objects, all we have to do is select all the objects we want and right click and hit apply, and then I'll apply that black material, whatever material you have selected, to all of the objects you had selected in the object manager. So now let's just duplicate this material, and let's create a light blue for the backing for the buttons and the gamepad. So just a little bit darker than our front cap color here. And we'll apply that directly to the button backing and the control pad backing. And let's go ahead and apply the black material to our control pad. And you're going to see that we kind of lose depth just like we did with the actual Game Boy body. So what I'm going to do is control, click, and drag this black material and just make it slightly lighter. So this is like a mid black, and apply that to the control pad and make sure it's applied to the right, so it's applied first, and use the C1 command in the selection tag, and you see that we just added some nice depth in there again. And now I'm gonna control, click, and drag this light blue material and make like a red, like a reddish orange kind of material for the buttons, so something like that. And we'll apply that to the A button. I'm going to control, click, and drag to duplicate and apply that same material tag to the B button here. And again, you're going to see we're losing that sense of depth, so I'll command click and drag, make this a dark red material, just a little bit darker, and I'll apply this to the A and B button. And again, we'll need to rearrange our texture tags, add C1 to the selection field, and there we go. We got some nice two-tone depth on our buttons. And let's go ahead and apply this dark red material to the power light, and let's apply this black material to the screen backing. So let's just make one more material, and this can be kind of yellowish green, something like this, and this can be the color of our screen. There we go. And what I want to do is add some like 2D light streaks, like cartoon highlight streaks, by creating a new material. And we'll make this a little bit lighter. And how we're going to do this is by utilizing the alpha channel on our material. So I'm going to turn that on. And this works just like the alpha channel in any other app where grayscale values punch through your original image or your color. And just so we can see this a little bit better, I'm going to right click on our preview window, and instead of the default sphere, we'll use a flat plane. And I'm also going to rename this light green. There we go. And to create the highlight streaks, I'm going to utilize a gradient. So I'm going to click this little button here, go to gradient, and you'll see that we're now fading our little plane here from left to right because of this gradient. So I'm going to click this gradient button, twirl this triangle down, and what I want to do is, if I click and drag, this will work like any other kind of gradient in any other app. We're just going to click and drag these little knots or these chips, and what I want to do is remove interpolation. I just want solid interpolation from one color chip to the other, so I'll change the smooth knot interpolation to none. And if I click and drag, you can see I'm creating new knots, and I can click and drag here and duplicate a black one. I'll just move this over, click and drag, create a new one. You can see that I just created a little kind of streak, and I can apply this to the screen, and because it's applied to the right of the first texture tag, it's going to apply on top of that darker green material. And now all I have to do is utilize this angle option, and we'll just give it a -50. And now we have some nice streaks. But if I actually zoom in here, you can see that because we have some depth here, we have some of the green on the sides. So we can either put C1 in the selection tag to just constrain the streaks to the front cap, or we could just get rid of the depth on this screen altogether, remove that selection, and just reposition this so it's right up against the screen backing. And with that, we just textured our entire object. So turning your 3D geometry into flat 2D pieces of art is super simple. By utilizing the luminance channels and material selections, we created basic flat colors that we then applied to all of our extruded objects.